Hello. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the June 2015 Transform. Oh, I have something on me. Okay, sorry. Transform Network Open Conversation. We are so glad that you're here with us tonight. And this is when I imagine at home everybody's going, open conversation, Transform Network. Wah! Okay. So tonight we are going to have a really amazing conversation with some fantastic people that we've assembled to talk about. Hello, everybody, and welcome to June 2015. Are we okay? Okay. To talk about how do white people talk to other white people about race. So this should be a very interesting conversation tonight. And just a little bit of background in case this is your first open conversation with Transform Network. Through Transform Network, we mobilize activists and missional practitioners for social transformation. And what we believe is simple: love God, love your neighbor, take collective action. So we have these open conversations so we can begin to break open some of the topics of faith, justice, doing good in the world, setting out together to actually take collective action to change the injustices in our world. And you can find out more about Transform Network at transformnetwork.org. We also have a Facebook page, of course, just facebook.com/transformnetwork. I am and on Twitter at Transform. It's at TRANS, the number 4 and M. And also, if you're on Twitter, you can use our hashtag tonight, which is, of course, hashtag TFOpenConvo. So make sure you use that. As we are talking tonight, if you believe in what we're doing through this work, you want to see more conversations like these, and you want to see some of the other classes and gatherings that we're doing continue, it'd be great if you would also consider a donation. And you can go to the Transform Network website and go to the contact tab, and there's a little donate button. So you can do it monthly or once, and we would totally appreciate that. That would be great support for what we're doing here. So basically what we do in these conversations, these are totally free and open. Anyone is welcome to tune in. And they're challenging, spiritually minded conversations on faith and justice issues. And you can check out all of our past conversations at our website, again, transformnetwork.org, under the Action tab. And that way you can find out what conversations we've already had and have a chance to review those. And of course, this one will be up very soon, in a few days, on the website as well. Okay, so this is how it's going to work tonight. I'm going to ask some questions of the people that we have gathered with us to talk about how white people talk to other white people about race. And each member of our panel will have an opportunity to share. And after a few questions back and forth, we're going to open it up to questions from those of us joining us on the YouTube link. And so you should be able to chat there amongst yourselves, but also we have Scott from Transform who will be helping us with the questions that are going on over there so that you guys can participate. So first, since we're having a little conversation together, we're going to get to know each other a little bit better. And as you guys can see underneath my little picture there, it has who I am. And I am Mickey Scott Bay Jones, and I am the Transform Network Director of Training and Program Development. And I am joined on the technical side by Scott. Scott, are you up there? He's waving. Scott Bostick, do you want to say anything about yourself? No. All right. He's on our board, and he's an amazing help. Scott and I co-hosted our national gathering in DC in April at Wesley Seminary, and it was absolutely fabulous. And also, if you go to the homepage there, you will see a video that we recorded at our gathering. So check that out. Scott's in it. I'm in it. And so is Holly there. So you'll get to see. Oh, no, Holly's not in it. Oh, Holly. Okay. But she's amazing. You'll find her in lots of the videos on the website. So tonight we are joined by Chris Crass, Dara Silverman, Jake Doctor, and Holly Roach. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So let's start with Chris. If you would introduce yourself, that would be fantastic.
Well, it's very nice to be here with you all, and it's beautiful to be with Transform in terms of folks who are trying to put faith into social justice action, and that's a big part of the work that I do, is trying to support congregations and people of faith moving into action in courageous and bold ways, trying to really reclaim what faith means in this country in a grounded social justice, in particular with white people, a racial justice orientation. So my name is Chris Grass, and I'm inspired by the tradition of education from the Highlander Center, which has a long history of combining political education and activism to help develop leaders and build movements. And so that's what I do with workshops and talks around the country, supporting a lot of grassroots organizing, specifically white people working for racial justice.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. And Chris is also the author of a book called Towards Collective Liberation, Anti-Racist Organizing, Feminist Praxis, and Movement Building Strategy. Did I get that right? Okay, good. All right. And so maybe he can tell us a little bit more about that later. We will get to resources, because that is one of the things people really want to know about, is what are some books, what are some websites, what are some things that can actually help me learn more. So hopefully Chris will tell us a little bit more about that later. Next we have Dara Silverman from Surge. Dara, could you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Mickey, for the introduction. My name is Dara Silverman. I'm the national coordinator of Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice. We're a national network of about 75 groups across the country that are primarily white people organizing other white people for racial justice. We're also working in partnership with a number of people of color-led groups like Black Lives Matter and other members of the Movement for Black Lives. And then we work with specific populations, including faith-based communities, the Presbyterians, United Methodist Women, environmental groups like the Sierra Club and 350.org and Greenpeace, and then with students, and we have a particular focus on parents who have been very activated and really interested in how to engage their kids and their families, particularly white families and multiracial families, and taking action for racial justice. So I'm excited to be here with all of you. I used to be the director of a group in New York City, Choose for Racial and Economic Justice. So a long history of working in faith-based communities to take action for racial and economic and social justice, and I'm excited to learn more about Transform and to partner with you more.
Yay, thank you, Dara. I'm really glad that you brought up the work you're doing with families, and specifically with white families. That's something I've seen come up in these last few days as we've been talking about the McKinney pool incident. I've seen several activists and just other parents call for white parents and white mothers even to begin stepping up and publicly speaking and publicly putting themselves out there for all of our children, including and specifically Black children. So thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm really glad that you're here. So next we have Holly Roach, and you guys, if you have been on more than one conversation, you know Holly Roach, but for those of you who may not be familiar with the amazingness that is Holly Roach, here she is.
Oh, thank you so much, Mickey. It's great to be here. I am an activist and a cultural organizer, and I live in North Carolina now, and I am currently the board chair for Transform Network, and just really happy to be here. Glad to be in another one of these conversations. They're really life-giving for me.
Yay! So that's our Holly, and so she has many years under her belt in the fight for justice. So she'll have lots of things to share tonight. And next we have Jake Doctor, who is a personal co-conspirator of mine on many things. And so Jake, if you would introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Jake, and I guess my biggest claim to fame would be what Mickey just said, being a co-conspirator of hers, one of Mickey's biggest fans. Her and I have worked on a project together since about August of last year called Theology of Ferguson, which more than anything has just been a place of learning for me. And I'm also an activist here in Portland, involved in various organizations as a volunteer and supporter and activist and learner. So I guess that's it.
Yay, thank you, Jake. Perfect. All right, so now that everybody knows a little bit more about our panel here tonight, whoever's on YouTube, you'll just have to introduce yourself to anyone who's in the room with you. If it's your cat, your dog, just say a quick hello to each other. And I know we were going to have a couple of viewing parties across the U.S. So hopefully, if those are going on, if there's somebody you don't know in the room, shake a hand, say hello. So we're going to start with some of the questions that I prepared. If you are joining us by YouTube, no, we will have a time of questions. So go ahead and start thinking of those. Maybe jot yourself a note as we go along in our conversation. So, as you guys know, we've named this conversation How White People Need to Talk to White People About Race. But before we get into the how, I'd love to back up and talk about the why. Let's talk about why these conversations even need to happen among or with white people. Because so often this is kind of thought of a black problem, or the minorities need to be talking about this, or even there is concern among well-meaning white people. Do I have anything to say? Should I be speaking up? So what is the why behind why white people need to talk to each other about race? So I'd love to go to you first, Dara, because that is the kind of the focus of what you do with Surge. So I'd love to hear you speak to that first.
Sure. So I think the biggest reason for us why, and we have a number of shared values which are on our website, and the biggest one, or one of the biggest ones for me, is that, and for us at Surge, is that for white people, we need to figure out what our stake is in racial justice. And a lot of times in organizing, we'll talk about the self-interest of someone. So what it is that their stake is, why it is that a parent cares about getting more affordable childcare, why it is a low-wage worker cares about raising the minimum wage. But there's a broader definition of self-interest as well, which for us is really around mutual interest, which is, we live in a society that's run by white supremacy, where white people are privileged and where it's a system. And that means that white people are a part of that as well, and white people are hurt by that as well. And it's not the same as the way that people of color are impacted by racism and by white supremacy, but white people's humanity is taken away in that. So, for me, as someone who was raised Jewish, both culturally and ethnically, and at times I've had more depth religiously, there's a lot of identification that I have of my history and where I come from. But for a lot of our white folks, a lot of what being white has meant has taken away their ethnic identity, has taken away the culture and where it is that white people come from. And that's a loss for people of their history. And it's sort of one of the costs of becoming white, is losing that cultural and that ethnic and that heritage that people really love. And so in a way, there are many ways in which white people are limited by white supremacy, and it might not be seen as in their economic self-interest to change it, because white people might get better jobs or they might have access to housing, but there are ways in which we are hurt by it as well. And so tapping into what that is for individual white people, for communities, And I think for our society at large, for us to really realize the emotional costs for white people in losing an identity has been really crucial for a lot of folks in really realizing that white supremacy is hurting all of us, and there's a real need to change the system so that white people can have our full humanity as well.
Yes, that is good. Thank you so much. That's a perfect intro to the conversation. Holly, I'd love to go to you next about this question. Why is this important for white people?
I think it's important for white people to talk to other white people about race because, A, there really isn't that expectation in white culture that we should know anything about race. Whiteness is kind of seen as the default, and then every other, racial identity is like other. And that's just really not the case. Whiteness is really a thing. And it's a thing that's really embedded in systems of oppression. So it's really important for white people to talk to white people so that we start to understand what it is that, like Dara says, what we're impacted by as well, and how our mental models are shaped by kind of this construct of whiteness. I think it's also really important that that white people engage in this conversation so that there's a conversation going on in white communities, so that there's some literacy around systemic racism in white communities, because when we see things like Ferguson and Baltimore and Cleveland, and we see these Black communities and other communities just really pushing back on the oppressive systems that are hurting them, that there's some understanding in the white community as to why that's happening, and so that white people aren't flooding to maybe the one person of color they know and trying to get all their questions answered. Like, we really need to share and bear the responsibility of racism in this country.
Thank you, Holly. That's really good to talk about what conversations need to be happening and why that really helps to have a basis for discussion to go on, not only in Black communities or Latino communities or other communities of colors, but that this is happening in neighborhoods that would consider themselves white communities. That this is not something they're going to escape. They really need to be able to talk to each other, and then people who are involved in their wider lives as well. Jake, I'd like to go to you next.
Yeah, I think for me, kind of, you said we got to move back to the why, and for me, it's also moving a step further back and just to the question of do. So do white people have the conversations? And by and large, no, we're currently not, and I have to think of the community that I grew up in, where I was never around those conversations. I was never taught to have those conversations, and it was, whether purposefully or not so purposely taught, that just wasn't something to be valued. As Holly was mentioning, some of those concepts of, we don't have to have it, so we don't value it. And then as I grew up, all of a sudden realized, now I'm going, why aren't we talking about this? How aren't we doing it? Now Chris may bring it up, but in some of his talks he's talked about it, is we don't have role models of, white people who are engaged in the conversation. And I think there's kind of the two sides to that. Number one, there are some role models, like there were the white clergy and white students who involved like in the freedom rides during the civil rights movement. And I think a lot of them, they're not role models because they probably did the right thing and they took the back seat and allowed other people to be in the focus and in the light, which is great that they did so. But it's kind of our history that we don't oftentimes go back and find out who these people were, read their stories and read their words. And other people have attempted to and messed up, and so they kind of then say, well, I'm going to be out. So when Chris mentioned that, and I can't remember the video that I watched of his, it really stuck with me of we need to build better white role models, not to take the focus away from people of color or other activists, but just so when a kid like me can go, oh, I want to be like Chris Kress, or I want to be like Dara or Holly, and having those role models, because we're not, those conversations by and large aren't happening. While this conversation is phenomenal, we're the kind of a small little group on the margins.
Thanks, Jake. Yeah, that's a perfect segue into Chris, because I see Chris even sometimes on Facebook assume almost like a big brother role, like he's able to kind of help other white people along on this journey, never assumes that everyone should be where he already is. And so if you could speak to this question of why we even need to, or why white people even need to be talking to other white people about race, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, in my experience growing up, there were a lot of white people talking to white people about race, but it was from the perspective of supporting white supremacy. And so I grew up with white people who courageously, passionately, regularly spoke about racism, blaming black women, in inner cities on welfare for every problem in the country, blaming undocumented workers, that's not the language they used, as a way of talking about, why their schools, why their parks were being defunded. So I grew up with white people who were racist in my family and in my community who could courageously and passionately speak about race. But then the white people who wanted to continue the legacy of Dr. King and Cesar Chavez were usually painfully awkward and confused and didn't quite know how to even talk about race and if they were even supposed to talk about race. And so, as was said earlier, there's a lot of times well-intentioned white people who don't even know if it's their place to speak about race. And so for me, and one of the things that's so beautiful about Surge and about Transform is that it's creating opportunities for white people to become courageous and passionate in speaking about anti-racism. Because yes, you have to go through an awkward stage. And yes, you go through a period when you feel totally guilty and you feel like everything you do is a mistake. And yes, you feel completely confused for periods of time. And then you start to just show up. You start to participate. You start to build relationships. You start to read things. And the awkwardness is a part of the process. What is not awkward for white people is to unconsciously go along in the system of white supremacy and say, yes, I'm colorblind, but be on the conveyor belt of supporting white supremacy, which is all around us. Most white people do not wake up and say, I want to support a brutal, violent system that is destroying and attacking the humanity of people of color. Nonetheless, most white people participate in a society that is in fact doing that. So we have to create a choice in white communities. You cannot just go along with the way things are, because the way things are is white supremacy. There's a choice that all white people have to make. Do you stand on the side of history of the lynchers, of the cops who are killing young black people or brutalizing them at a pool party? Or do you stand on the side of the history of the abolitionists, of the freedom riders, of the dream defenders, of the Ferguson People's Movement? And we have to, so white people not only need to talk to white people passionately and courageously about anti-racism, but make it clear that there is a choice. Most white people don't even think that they're supposed to make a choice. They're just supposed to kind of put their head in the sand and hope this the whole thing goes away. And then when a black person says something about racism, it's like, oh my God, why do they keep talking about race? And so as white people, we need to create a clear narrative that says anti-racism is not only the right thing to do because of the negative impacts in communities of color, but as Dara and Holly and Jake are talking about, anti-racism is also a process of reclaiming our humanity as white people that white supremacy deforms and attacks on a daily basis to keep us locked into this white supremacist framework of devaluing people of color and simultaneously supporting a deeply unequal society that negatively impacts the vast majority of humanity, including a lot of poor and working class white people. So white people talking to white people is both communicating, but also moving white people into action.
Chris, that's great. I love that both, I think you and Dara talked about the humanity of white people and how white supremacy destroys everyone. And I think it's really important when we start to talk about this, that this is not about freedom for one group of people, right? Like if I'm free, everybody's free. This is really what this is about. Love and peace and really that concept of shalom is for everyone. It's not about changing who's in power. and putting another group in power. And so I think the people that are doing really good work, that's how you know that's what they're doing, because they're not trying to just put another group or another person in power. Jake, did you have a thought that built a little bit on what Chris said there?
Yeah, Chris kind of sparked it. Something I was thinking earlier that I forgot to mention was that part of the reason why white people need to be having this conversation is because this conversation is mostly the fault of white people. Like, we're the ones who caused this very system, and so not to put it in the framing of then we're going to be the ones to solve it, because it's going to take more of a community. But you know, it's a reparative justice brings the aggressor into the conversation as well, to say, you know, I'm the one who caused this, and so I'm going to have to be a part of solving the problem. You know, James Baldwin talks about, you know, I didn't realize, and you know, I'm not going to use the word because it's loaded, but I didn't realize I was a Negro until the white man told me that I was a Negro, you know? And so this whole entire conversation of racism and disenfranchised people is a result of my actions, and not just mine specifically, but my ancestors and other folks, but I have to recognize my complicity in it. So therefore I have to be a part of the conversation, and my faith pushes me towards that even further than just my own humanity. So I think we have to kind of recognize our place in being the cause.
Yes, good, thank you. I like that. Okay, so next question, I want to kind of move into talking a little bit about how our faith relates to this work. And we have different faith lenses from just even who we have on our panel here. And Transform Network, although we are kind of grounded in the deep wells of the Christian faith and following the words of Jesus, we have always been a multi-faith space, in that we have always had our friends of different faiths, and also those who would consider themselves agnostic or atheist, that have walked with us in our conversations and gatherings, on things that we do together, actions that we take. So we try to create that space where anyone who's working in the realm of justice, who's interested in these conversations, is involved, and is able to partner with us, and hopefully we are invited to partner with them in their spaces as well. Now we do pull from a deep well of our faith and those that have gone before in that tradition of Jesus, the call to love, to freedom, healing, and peace. So I would love for you guys, just kind of a little in a personal way, or even with other people that you've worked with, if you have a story, or just ways that this has worked for you, what from your personal faith or your tradition, your faith traditions, or spiritual or religious beliefs drives this work for you or is central to your work? I would love to just kind of open that up. And Holly, could you start us on that?
Sure, I can talk about that. I actually have been an anti-racist ally longer than I've been a Christian. I spent a good chunk of my life not subscribing to Christianity because of a bad Bible study teacher in high school, basically. But I think that I need to say this first. I need to say that I am racist, that I was brought up in a racist culture, and although I never considered myself overtly hateful toward anyone, I am having to do a process of dialysis. I have to pull the poison out of me, because it was there in my schooling. It was present, ever present, in the culture that I was raised in this country. So because of that, I need my faith in this work. I used to be, as an ally, I thought that if I could put all of the ignorant white people and rich people and mean people and oppressive people on an island and nuke it, that would fix things. And my faith has really changed that. I don't feel that way anymore because of the body of Christ, because of the very palpable and beautiful sense that I have of the body of Christ that my faith gives me. So that's kind of the major way that my faith has made me a better activist, I believe.
And Holly, too, I've heard you talk about before how it was reading from some people who refuse to kind of let their Christianity be co-opted by the certain factions of Christianity that want to make it into kind of the American project, right, of like colonial conquest and Christianity, of meeting Christians that were doing it a different way. So it was really kind of, I think sometimes we're afraid to tell our stories, but was it some of that storytelling that allowed you to find a way to meld your faith or to try faith again after finding this home in being an activist?
Yeah, I mean, so it's the question, like, how did I find my home in faith?
Yeah, I mean, did you just kind of figure it out yourself, or did you finally go, oh, there are some people doing this? Maybe I can check out this Jesus guy.
Yeah, like I said, I broke up with Jesus in high school, spent 20 years, being New Age and Buddhist and kind of spiritual seeker or whatever. And then it was when my mom died that I was kind of in a deep, dark night of the soul, when somebody handed me a book by Rob Bell and another one by Shane Claiborne. And Rob Bell just showed me that there was another kind of Christianity out there that wasn't Fox News, because I just had literally spent 20 years thinking that's all Christianity was kind of that pundit factory for the conservative right. And then, reading Shane Claiborne, his book is called Irresistible Revolution, really gave me a sense of myself, or a place for myself as an activist in the church. Because when I read the Bible again, I felt compelled to change my life. And I felt compelled to re-engage my activism after a time of burnout. So the Jesus story really does that to me. It really lights my fire and wants me to get moving again. And it was really, Shane's work has helped me he really built kind of a culture of activism that was around faith with his kind of misfit friends from college. And it really reminded me of my days in San Francisco when I met Chris, and Food Not Bombs, and Art Revolution, and just living out this like awesome alternative prefigurative culture that was so amazing to be a part of, and it's just deeply impacted me my whole life. So
awesome. Thank you. Well, we'll have to hear a little bit from Chris about that time when you guys met there. But Dara, I would love for you to speak a little bit about what role or what that interaction is between religion or faith or spirituality and your racial justice work.
So I worked as a community organizer for many years, and I was working mostly in low-income communities of color. And I was really angry. I was in my early 20s, and I was so angry at how messed up the system was, and that everything needed to change, and it wasn't happening fast enough. And at a certain point, I sort of realized, hey, this anger is not going to sustain itself through the 16-hour workdays that I'm doing 6 days a week. So there has to be something else that motivates me. And I don't know exactly what that is, but I'm white and I'm Jewish, so maybe there's something there. And that was about 15 years ago, and that sort of set me on a path, an exploration path of what does it mean to be Jewish, and what does that mean in terms of both my individual life, what does it mean in terms of the mandate to Jews to do tikkun olam, to repair the world. Are there ways in which that's paternalistic in this moment where there are a lot of white Jews in the United States, and where Jews proportionally, white Jews have more positional power, particularly on the East Coast and in New York City where I live. So it really led me on this path to delve into what does it mean to organize my own people. And I think when I was at Jews for Racial and Economic Justice in New York, one of the big things that we realized was that for a lot of Jews, the synagogue wasn't the place where they felt most Jewish. And sometimes we call ourselves the synagogue in the streets. And I think for a lot of white people specifically, they are looking to feel faith. And particularly for people where social justice is their driving force, they feel it when they do activism. So, you know, I think the work that Transform does, I think the work that Chris has done with the Unitarian Universalists, I think the work that United Methodist Women do, and the Presbyterian Racial Justice Commission, the work of standing on the side of love within the Unitarians, I think all of those are really tapping into that idea that in this political moment, there is such a need for people to be sort of praying with our feet, as Abraham Joshua Heschel used to say, of how do we take action, and through the action that we take, we are an embodiment of a bigger vision of the divine. And what does that look like? So I think within Surge, what we found is that it's incredibly powerful to partner and to have our groups really have a faith base in what they do for people where that's really meaningful. So I live in New York State, and I was just up in Hudson, New York, which is a very poor city that is rapidly gentrifying. And they were talking about the role of some of the Presbyterian ministers up there who are very radical, and who every time there's a rally, they put on their collars and they come out and they try to bring their congregations, and what that means to have people of faith showing up in a really visible way as white people, as people of faith saying this is unjust and there's such a need for us to be figuring out together how we take action. So I think it's a great question. I'm excited to continue this conversation.
And thank you, Dara. That's really helpful to hear your experience with different groups, because I think sometimes that's not what makes it into the news, right? Is that all these different religious groups are supporting racial justice efforts. We don't really know that that's happening, and people may not know that in their own denominations that there are, or their own religious tradition, that there are groups standing up for racial justice. I was not aware of Jews for racial and economic justice. So, and I have lots of Jewish friends. So, I mean, people may just not, like, they really, truly may not know that something is out there that they can plug into. So it's really, really great to hear that there are some different groups out there. And I know that Chris does a lot of work with different racial groups. I mean, not racial groups, different, he does that too, but different faith groups. So, Chris, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that, in terms of just some of my own story of coming into spirituality that is, very similar to Holly and Dara's is, after September 11th, and just really seeing the political landscape of this country move so dramatically to the right, and so many of us who have been doing movement work for a long time just feeling this incredible sense of urgency with the war at home, the war abroad. Within a couple of years after September 11th, just my own experience of despair and depression, and just feeling that not just myself, but a culture of despair and anxiety within activist world. For me, it was really just a searching for, we need more to help ground us. We need more to help, just as Dara was saying, to call forward our spiritual traditions, our faith traditions, our cultural traditions, to call forward the powers that we can. I mean, I call them, spiritual superpowers. We need superpowers to take on these super evil systems of oppression. And so for me, I do a lot of workshops around developing spiritual leadership for collective liberation, with all kinds of different faith groups. And what I try to encourage is this convergence of, yes, there's what we do in our places of worship, and then there's what we do in the streets and in our demonstrations and in our community meetings and gatherings. And really, it's bringing our spirituality and our faith into the streets to create a mighty, spiritually grounded, spiritual superpower infused movement for justice. And specifically with white people, it's not just, sometimes, a lot of times, talking about race with white people, it can get into this, like, focusing on facts and statistics and, well, what about this and what about that? And it starts becoming a head game of arguing between Fox News and, the like women of color feminist library and people's history of the United States books that the rest of us read, and then it becomes just a head game. And so we need to create opportunities for white people to experience this is sacred work. Doing anti-racist work as white people is part of the sacred journey of our faith traditions, of what it means to be human, of what it means to create beloved community. And I think most people, most white people would say, I would love to be a part of a multiracial democracy where people loved and respected each other. I would love to be a part of Dr. King's beloved community, but then think that what you're supposed to do is just pretend that there's no differences, which essentially means just pretend everybody's white and get over it. And so we need to create spiritually grounded opportunities for white people to understand what is to gain from anti-racism. Because a lot of white people know there's a lot of fear. They're afraid of making mistakes. They're afraid of losing friends. They're afraid of heated conversations with family members or coworkers. We need to use our faith traditions to show white people what there is to gain in a different kind of world, both in our personal transformation around anti-racism, but also in our community transformation of joining the movement and being part of organizations working for racial justice.
Yeah, and there's so many ways we can draw upon our faith traditions. Yes, to show up and to show those other people that are to talk about the other people that have gone before us, but even to deal with that fear, right? Like if we say we really have this faith and these spiritual superpowers, well, where is that when you have that fear about talking to your dad or your brother or whatever? Call upon those spiritual superpowers to actually give you the strength to have those conversations and participate. Oh, so our technical guru, Scott Bostick, has something to say. Scott.
Thanks, Mickey. The thing I wanted to share, so I'm a seminarian at Wesley Theological Seminary in DC, and one of the things that happens, or hopefully happens, as people are being trained as clergy and to be pastors, is you have this unpacking of your embedded theology. So you have this unpacking of the faith that you brought to school, and hopefully you get to see that God is bigger than you thought God was when you showed up at school. One of the things that I quickly realized is maybe calling God He all the time was a bit limiting. But one of the privileges that I've had as I've been working with and becoming friends with and getting to know people who are on that same journey a couple of years behind me or moving through it with me, is just that moment where people stop and realize, oh my gosh, I have been racially biased or racist for my whole life, and I've never even realized it. I've never even stopped to think about it. And I've been blessed because I've been a person that people of all colors have had comfort and willingness to talk to about that and what that's like and how they can intentionally be different, how they can intentionally lean into that discomfort and begin to enter into that process of self-reflection for how they can live differently. And I think it's such a powerful and encouraging thing for me to see, because the majority of the people that I go to school with, not all of them, will go on to lead congregations and will go on to lead faith organizations and groups, whether they're as a pastor or whether they're leading a nonprofit, and have opportunities to have the same kind of conversations and hopefully lead people to the same kind of aha moments that they had. One of my dear friends and I today were talking about that, and he's just emerging out of that guilty stage where he's beginning to name and claim that space that he's in and move towards, okay, I've moved beyond just feeling guilty about the fact that I have white privilege and beginning to step into, now I'm going to do something with it and create opportunities for other people and really learn as much as I can to use the privilege that I have for good instead of continuing to be just complicit in perpetuating a cycle that's led us to the place that we are now.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, basically, I think if you're in seminary and your seminary isn't shaking you up in many ways, isn't isn't kind of destroying your theology and making you rebuild it, and isn't challenging you on issues of race. If you can get through seminary and you've not talked about race at all, you may not be getting very much out of your seminary journey. So that's just my personal opinion. But I am a NAIT student with Indigenous people, so we talk about race all the time. So I'm a little biased there. So Jake, I would love for you to talk about faith, religion, spirituality, and racial justice work for you. Where do those things collide?
I mean, everybody's kind of talked about their process and their journey or the tradition that they're from, and I'm from the beautiful tradition of non-denominational evangelicalism, where there are no roots and no past, and we are the chosen people. I like to call the neutered mediocrity gospel, where we don't talk about anything that might offend anyone, especially in the non-denominational movement. Grew up in a church where nothing of consequence is talked about, because if we say this, then that'll piss off the Lutherans that are here, and if we say this, it'll piss off the Methodists, the people, So therefore, we just figured out the kind of most mediocre line to draw and not actually say anything. And so I kind of mourn that loss of tradition now that I've grown and seen those kind of traditions of other people that are from, mainline movements or some other, the Catholic Church or, in Judaism or, these long traditions of, and, like we were talking about earlier, having heroes. Evangelicalism, and there's not too many like heroes of the faith that we look back to. And so I've kind of had to like recreate that tradition, and by and large have sought that outside of evangelicalism. I don't consider myself an evangelical anymore. But to say, I was kind of robbed of that tradition, and I have to recreate that and seek those people out. And at first, just by the nature of my privilege and my nearsightedness or short-sightedness, those people first off were white men who I started looking to towards heroes, because you grab the closest things to you, and those are the things that were offered. But now I'm trying to say, we need to start helping expand that language out for other people and presenting those others. Yes, we need to provide role models of white courageous people, but we also, and those people who are white courageous people, hopefully are then pointing those people to other people of color. A friend of Mickey and I's, Broderick Greer, who, if you're not following on Twitter, you should be, recently talked about how he has did a year of not reading any white voices, only read voices of color. And so I've taken on that challenge and just recently started. I'm like 3 weeks in, so I've read one book so far. But we need to be able to encourage that and push other people towards that, But with faith and with justice and with race, how do those things connect? I think that's a process of people figuring out for themselves, but then also that needs to be figured out in community. And I think that's the first step, is finding that community for yourself. And I realized in the last few years that when I look around, most of the community that I have, just the kind of default community that you all of a sudden realize you're in, whether it's intentional or not, was white, was heterosexual, was cisgender. And so now I have to be intentional to seek those things out. And at first it may seem a little bit forced, which is mostly uncomfortable for me, because everybody else is like, we've been having this conversation for generations, you're more than welcome to come. But you have to take that intentional step of saying, where am I lacking? And because of that, my faith has only ever improved. In the last year, I've developed relationships with some really amazing people, and my faith has improved in ways that it never did in my years of Sunday school and all those sorts of things. So I think it's only beneficial, even though it's definitely can be uncomfortable at first.
All right, thanks. Thank you guys for all sharing about faith and your racial justice work. So now we're going to kind of go into a lightning round-ish. I want to play a little game to help us get into the how to talk to white people about race, how white people talk to white people. So I have a little game. It's called What's That You Say? Okay. Um, so I am going to kind of base this on the linguistic turn, or like the teaching device, right, of Jesus that said, "You have heard it said, but I say," right? And give you something that you've probably all heard said by or about white people and race issues. And then I want you to say what you would say to that or instead of that. Does that make sense, everybody? Kind of? All right. Okay, so the first one is, and like I said, try and do a brief answer. I mean, say what you need to say, but you're going to try and do it like 2 minutes or less. All right, so, and I think Scott has the power to mute you if you go over 2 minutes. I don't know that he will, but it would be funny. Okay, so he won't. All right, so the first one is, you have heard it said that white people need to keep out of the discussion about race. They just need to shut up and listen. But I say, and Chris, go.
But I would say that that there are periods of time for white people to actively engage in listening. So sometimes that means like what you just said can be heard as just stay out of the conversation, go away, you're not even supposed to be here, as opposed to, yes, I really want to study what Toni Morrison says, what James Baldwin says, what some of the incredible leaders in the Black Lives Matter movement right now are saying. And it's important to have white people who can bring other white people into the conversation by countering that message, by being able to say, this is how listening to these voices has profoundly changed my life. One of my early mentors said that one of the ways white supremacy hurts white people is it teaches white people they have nothing to learn from communities of color. They're robbed of the history, the legacy, the traditions, the visions, the literature of communities of color. And so being able to talk to other white people as white people around why we need to both listen to the voices of people of color and to share our own stories as white people around why we've come into this journey. So white people absolutely have a place within this conversation, and it's a place of both looking to existing leadership of people of color and bringing our own leadership as white anti-racists.
Awesome. Dara, you're up next.
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry. I got lost because I was listening to Chris's answer.
Sure. Okay. You have heard it said that white people need to keep out of the discussion about race. They just need to shut up and listen. But I say...
Right. So what I say is it's actually one of the most important roles that white people can play is to talk to and engage other white people. Sometimes when white people have an analysis about racial justice, all they want to do is talk to people of color who are radicalized. But in fact, one of the most important things, and one of the best and most exciting things, I think, is to talk to other white people and really to have those conversations and think, how do we call other white people in? How do we bring them into this conversation? The goal is not to get your Tea Party uncle. Like, he's already set in a certain place. My brother is very conservative. I'm not going to change his mind. But there's a lot of people out there, particularly in this moment, who are like, hey, I saw that video about what happened down in Texas, and I don't understand why the cops would do that. Or I'm starting to question the power of the police in this situation. So there's these openings. You know, it's sort of like the Matrix. Like, everyone's ready to take the pill and see the different world, and they want some support to figure out how to do it. And that doesn't mean that in those conversations that people are going to get it exactly right or have the same language that you or I might have, but they want to be in the conversation. So I feel like one of the most important roles we can play as white people is to have those conversations with other white people and help them tap into, like, what is our stake in this? And how are we going to make mistakes because we are raised in this white supremacist, racist society, but we're going to keep going and we're going to learn from that and we're going to take action with other white people to make these changes happen. You know, seeing those young people down in McKinley who are standing out there with signs saying white silence equals violence, I mean, it just warms my heart. And I know from watching the dialogue online, so many people are inspired by that. So there are so many ways for people to take action in one-on-one conversations, in groups, in your churches or synagogues or mosques. So it's figuring out the way that makes sense for you in the community that you're in.
Awesome. Perfect. Holly, you're up next.
Okay. My initial anti-racism training was done in San Francisco with an institute called Challenging White Supremacy. I think Chris was actually in my class. I think we're in the same 15 weeks with Sharon Martinez. And she had teamed up with the People's Institute with Bettina Martinez, who ran the People of Color group, and then we were the White People group. And we met, we would all come in the doors together and then go into different rooms. And white people went into one room and people of color went into another room. And I think that we met separately for like 13 or 14 weeks. It was like a 15-week thing, right? So there was a lot of work that we as white people needed to do to become ready to be in conversation about race with people of color. And equally, I believe that the people of color had work that they needed to do before they were ready to be in dialogue with white people about race. And so I think it's really important that we each do this work, you know, and that there is a time to speak up. I'm much more vocal in all white rooms. I feel the responsibility. I'm like, hey guys, let's talk about race. Let's do this together. And then there are times like at the Black Lives Matter rally I went to in Charlotte, one of them, we were going around this circle, everyone was speaking, I was one of the few white people there, and I spoke up, and people didn't like it, and so then I shut up, you know, because I got that this was a moment for the people of color to speak. It wasn't, they didn't want to hear from me in that moment, and I think that that's okay. I think it's okay to step back, to practice stepping up and stepping back, and really just respecting the boundaries of the groups that we're with. And that we each do our work and prepare ourselves to be a kind of in sacred conversation around reconciliation, around race and other injustices that have divided people so horribly.
Thank you, Holly. Perfect. And Jake, go.
Mostly ditto, but yeah, I mean, I think that yes, we need to shut up and listen. I would say that that's true. But like Chris said, it needs to be an active listening, and like Holly was saying, it needs to be for the right moments. It needs to be in the right context, where you know we can be behind the scenes. It doesn't. The focus doesn't have to be on us. You know, there's oftentimes the recentering of whiteness, even with good intentions. And we need to be aware of that and careful of that. Where if we look around and go, oh, I've had the mic for much longer than anyone else. You know, just you're going to make those mistakes, and then you can apologize afterwards. And hopefully, through the relationships and community, you know, Christina Cleveland recently posted a piece about, or it might not have been recently, about white pastors going into towns and you know not being a part of the relationship, not having earned that place. Where if you show up and nobody knows who you are and you grab the microphone, it's kind of why should we be listening to you? But if you've been around, then they may be more likely to listen. So you shut up and listen for a while, and then maybe eventually earn that chance at the microphone.
Great. Scott, did you want to jump in on this lightning round? Okay, no. You just wanted to show up in a new shirt. I gotcha. Okay. All right. Next round is. You have heard it said, but white people who talk about all this race stuff are just experiencing white guilt and trying to make themselves feel better. But I say, and let's go back to Chris. You start.
I say that white people who are speaking out about race are a part of a beautiful, long tradition of white people throughout the history of the United States who have been doing that, and that often historically white people will look back on those white people with honor and feel a sense of, I wish, you know, if I had been in those times, I would have done that too. You know, most white people today would say, yes, I would be marching with Dr. King, or you know, I hope that I and my family would have been a part of the Underground Railroad. But the question is always not what you would have hoped to have done in the past, but what you do now. And so really being able to talk about, we're part of this long tradition of white people doing this work. And I'm not doing this for guilt. I'm not doing this to feel better. I'm doing this, well, I am doing this to feel better. I'm doing this to feel better in the sense of trying to get the poison of white supremacy out of me, and trying to, thinking about my 3-year-old son who's being raised in this poisonous white supremacist society, and not wanting him to grow up internalizing it, knowing that he will, whether I choose to or not, because it's all around us unconsciously and consciously in the society. And so I do want white people to feel better, because I think that the anger and resentment and hate of white supremacy actually makes most white people miserable. And so for me, there are periods when most white people coming into consciousness do feel guilty. You learn about the horrors of slavery, the horrors of genocide, the horrors of just the brutality, the unbelievable violence, and there is a period of guilt. And so as white anti-racists who have been doing this work for a while, we need to be able to help support white people coming into the work to move through guilt and come into a place of, as Serge talks about, mutual interest, or collective liberation, as Bell Hooks talks about it. So it's not about white people talking about race who just feel guilty. It's about white people talking about race because there's a historic responsibility to do so, and there's an unbelievable opportunity for white people to be on the right side of history of creating beloved community in the process of talking about race.
Awesome. Dara, you're up next.
So I think, as Chris said, sometimes white people can get caught up in guilt and shame. We've also definitely experienced that for some white people, particularly poor and working class white people, that there's a lot of identification with the circumstances of oppression, of the way that class oppression and race oppression play out. And so that guilt and shame doesn't necessarily exist. And so I think one of the things that we really tried to work on is both the mutual interest that Chris was talking about and that I mentioned earlier, and sort of the idea of shared liberation. But also, we had Maurice Mitchell from Ferguson Action, who's a part of the Movement for Black Lives, on one of our conference calls last fall, and he said, if your anxiety about trying to get it right is standing in the way, that has nothing to do with my liberation. That has nothing to do with Black liberation. So I think sometimes there can be this feeling that the guilt and the shame are what's motivating people. I think that's actually often a barrier, and that what people really want is to be free. And so part of how we get free is by having safety and connection and community and feeling loved and belonging. And so, one of the things that can happen sometimes, like I was mentioning earlier, I think, is that white people can sort of be looking to people of color for validation of, like, tell me that what I'm doing is right. Tell me that I have the right answer. Like, I want to be the good white person. And I sort of imagine in this moment right now that there are all these white people who are calling people of color on the phone and saying, tell me what to do. And the reality is, like, we know that police brutality is wrong. We know that the way that every 28 hours that a Black person is killed by the police or security forces is atrocious. And we don't need anyone to tell us that. What we need is to be standing up against that and showing up again and again. And that looks different in different places. We have a group in Chicago, a Surge chapter that's been around for 6 months, and they hadn't done any public actions until these past couple weeks. They did a joint action with Black Youth Project 100 that was around the Say Her Name and Rekia Boyd, and it was a vigil for all the Black women and girls who have been killed by the police and have been attacked. And it was because they built the relationships and they built that trust, and they'd been there and had showed that they were in it for their own sake and not because they wanted to make anyone else feel better. So I think one of the big pieces for us is really, how do people identify that mutual interest and take accountability through taking action?
Oh, so many good things in there. Yay, thank you so much. All right, Holly, you're up.
Let's see. I would say that I think it is very possible for white allies to get very entrenched in that identity, so much so that they get kind of an ego boost. I think it's maybe just part of the process, and that maybe not everybody encounters it, but I've definitely seen it where other white people can just be dismissed as like, oh, they just don't get it. You know, those people don't get it. Like it's a flip you can switch. And it's really not. It's really a lifelong process of dialysis, of pulling the poison out. And so white people have to be willing to check ourselves. You know, we need to be able to check ourselves and look at ourselves in a humble way and say, wow, I see a racist behavior. I just identified it. I'm going to pull that poison out. And then we also have to be able to check each other. We need to find ways to be able to say, hey, man, hey, friend, that sounded this way to me, you know, and I think that could be hurtful, or have you ever looked at it this way, you know, and just have the courage and really give each other courage to be able to, in a relational way, in a way without causing more harm or mirroring the oppression, to be able to really check each other about the racism as it comes up, because it's going to come up. Okay, white people in this country are racist, and most of them aren't trying to be. It's just something that is in us, and we have to pull out the poison. So I'd say, you know, getting good at checking each other, and someone, I think it was Chris, said that we want to feel good. I think that's the point. All of us, our communities need to be safer, healthier, happier places, and that's the job of our movement. So let's work towards feeling good.
Thank you, Holly. That's perfect. Okay, and Jake, what would you say to this one?
I mean, I agree with everything everyone said, but sometimes I question the concept of white guilt. A lot of times I hear it framed from progressives and from liberals as something that I just need to get over. I'll get past that, or I used to have that, and I'm not anymore. And I totally understand that. And for I think most of the people, it's a good impulse that we don't want to just stay in that place of guilt. But at the same time, if we truly believe it's a disease or symptoms or sin, you know, kind of using some of the language of like Alcoholics Anonymous, I may never lose that part of my identity. You know, if I'm an alcoholic, it may be something that I'm an alcoholic for life. And it may be something that I never get past. So it's something that I have to kind of always be aware of and recognize that maybe it's not something that we just so easily get past. Maybe it's something that I will be continually revisiting, not in a place of paralysis that doesn't allow me to move forward or to be active. But sometimes I view it as just, it's just a phase that you go through. And I did that white guilt thing. I read a couple books and, you know, kind of finding ways to not just sit in it, but to be aware of it and recognize it. And because of that, like, again, with like the AA language, that guilt then motivates me to then go make amends or to follow some of the other processes, you know, that I have to go to those people that I've hurt in the past or that I'm hurting now, to say, because of my brokenness, because of this disease, because of this sin that I have, I'm going to act a certain way sometimes, and it's something I'm trying to get past. And I need your forgiveness and help to be a part of that.
So, you know, I think this would be a good time. I do have other little questions there, but I think it would be a good time to break and actually talk a little bit about feelings and about like how can we mute? Thank you. Feelings and you know, how do you have that conversation with other white people about their feelings of guilt, about apathy? That's another thing that they're talking about in the chat, that you can just become apathetic to it as a white person. Like you really can, like Chris was saying, I have to decide, I have to choose for this to be something that I care about, because as a white person, in many respects, I can just go on about my life and it doesn't have to bother me. And for me, as a mother of black children, I feel like my house is on fire, and I feel like I'm outside screaming that my house is on fire and my babies are in it, and my neighbors are sipping their tea on the front porch, and it's driving me nuts. And so, you know, so how oh, was that Peter? Shout out to Peter for the comment. And so how do we talk about the feelings involved, right? The apathy or the guilt, and all those things that start to come up, right? As white people talk to other white people about all this race business, because like Dara said, it can end up being taken out kind of on the black friend. That has happened to me many, many, many times, happens all the time. And sometimes people realize they're doing it and they're like, I am so sorry, but I do not have another black friend to talk to. And this will be people from across the country who will literally Facebook me, and I am the only black person that they feel comfortable having a conversation with. But they would say, I live a multicultural life. Like there's a black guy that works at the coffee shop I go to or whatever. So clearly white people are wanting to process this, right? They're wanting to talk about their feelings and about what they're thinking. So how do you help each other with that, kind of in that in-house conversation? Who has something that they want to dare? All right, let's go to you.
So one of the things that we do a lot in Surge is we really practice having these conversations with other white people. So how do we call other white people in? How do we sort of refocus? Because there can be such a focus on, like, I need to talk to a person of color about this. I need to get some validation about how I'm feeling. And, in certain ways, we talk a lot in people who do racial justice about decentering whiteness. But I actually think one of the best places to center whiteness is in conversations between white people, to go a little bit deeper into what does it do in this society when we're told that all of our answers are right and that we have the highest value? What are the things that we don't get to hear, both within ourselves, maybe within identities that we have that are marginalized? And what does it mean if, as Chris was saying earlier, we all want to be free? What does that actually look like? Anne Braden, who's a mentor to a lot of folks in Surge and was a white racial justice activist in Kentucky and in the South, her and her husband Carl bought a house to desegregate a neighborhood in Louisville and sold it to a black family, and he ended up being jailed for sedition. And she talks about the idea of the other America, that white people need to choose the other America to join, to say the way that America operates is not actually benefiting us, because there's so many ways in which our humanity is scrunched. There are so many ways in which it's limited. And so I think for white people, it's really around how do we, I see this a lot online, white people, go get your cousins, go call in your sisters and brothers. Even just today, Reverend Sekou, who does a lot of direct action trainings and comes out of Boston and has been doing a lot in Ferguson and in Baltimore and around the country, said, what would it be like to have a group of white mamas who every time a black person was attacked would go and do direct action and would make food and fundraise for those black families? And that's part of what we're trying to do at Surge, is how do we create that beloved community, both in local areas where we have 75 groups around the country, and then within faith, within parent groups, within student groups. What are the ways that people are building those connections so that it isn't an automatic turning to the people who are always bearing the brunt and are doing the emotional labor of this work, but that as white people we can do this work with each other. How can we create that community with each other and know that we're going to make mistakes, but that we're going to learn from them, and that part of this work is doing it together. Up in Vermont, we have a couple of different groups that have done skill shares where they all practice having these conversations. And so I think a big part of this work is how do we practice and strengthen the muscles for white people of engaging in racial justice work, of having hard and awkward conversations. I'll stop there.
Okay, so that's really helpful as far as, and I love Sekou's comment. I saw that earlier today and thought that was really brilliant. Mm-hmm. And Chris, I would love for you to talk a little bit about working with, and you can address the feelings piece too, but I would love for you to talk a little bit about working with people of color who are in leadership, right? So, because people may be asking themselves, well, this is great, and when we're talking about that, white people talking to other white people in groups like Surge, where it's specifically, white people coming to action together, but then how do you sit under black leadership? How do you interact when you're trying to not always be going to the black person with your, look what I came to a march today, I'm a really awesome white person. because I would say we have that kind of friendship, Holly, and we have these friendships and we're able to interact with each other, but there is a learning curve there. How can I don't know how you actually, like I said, you kind of big brother other white people. I see that just on Facebook, but and I mean that in a positive way. But like, how can you help other white people navigate those kinds of relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of this, the conversations piece with other white people, the being in relationship with organizers of color, all of it's a journey and a process. And one of the biggest concerns or obstacles, both for white people to talk to white people, but also white people to build relationships with people of color, is that once you understand white privilege, most white people are like, oh my God, everything I do is going to reproduce oppression. Everything I do is going to further white privilege. And so I need to sit in my room and read enough books and read enough things on chat discussions online, and I'm never going to actually do anything in the world until I have it all figured out and I can do it perfectly and not make a mistake. Well, that just does not work. You have to do things in practice. You have to make mistakes. You have to go out and do it, and we learn through the process. Yes, we study. Yes, we listen. Yes, we learn. And we have to engage and learn through the process. So for me, I mean, I was very fortunate to have people of color in my life who I worked with, but one of the things that helped was that I was showing up. I was showing up into social justice situations where there were people of color, and I often would listen to what they would say, because oftentimes white people are like, well, I need people of color to tell me what to do. The reality is people of color are telling white people what to do all the time. People of color on a regular basis. I mean, just what Dara said with Reverend Sekou. People of color are regularly saying what they think white people should be doing, but white people often aren't listening and are waiting for a specific personalized message just to them. And so I would listen to people of color in my life, and the truth is, through multiracial strategy conversations, it became clear from organizers of color that one of the most important things I could do was organize white people into racial justice work. And the truth is, I've developed stronger relationships with people of color over the years the more I've done anti-racist work in white communities. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but the more I've done work in white communities around anti-racism, the more I've built trusting, long-lasting relationships, because then when I show up for multiracial organizing efforts, I'm not just showing up myself, I'm showing up with crews of people, with organizations that have gone through training and practice. I'm showing up with networks of relationships. I'm mobilizing resources and large numbers of people, and so that's how we start to build relationships over time. But just to start tomorrow is listen to the people of color in your life. Listen to people of color historically and today who are talking about what's going on, and really don't wait for a personalized message to you, but start to be like, you know what? When these folks are talking about that, this is how I can apply that in my life. And people of color will see white people doing the work. White people who are doing the work, who are showing up at the fundraisers, who are showing up to stuff envelopes to do fundraising mailings, people who are doing childcare at the events to support mothers of color being in meetings, white people who are showing up time and again and bringing friends more and more with them each time. People of color see that, and relationships start to build over time. So it's not build a relationship first and then start doing stuff. It's do things, and in the process of doing things, be open, be humble, and be genuine, and listen. And a lot of important insights and messages are there waiting for white people to get, but that internalized white superiority of thinking, I have to figure it all out myself, I have to figure it out all myself, I have to be perfect, gets in the way.
That's really helpful. I think there's some things people can actually, really latch onto there about where to begin, because that's always a question. And Jake, you're still with us, right?
Yeah,
okay.
I'm here.
So Jake, I would love for you to address this a little bit, because I know that's something that you've had to work out, right? It's like, how do I get involved? What do I do? How do I step up, step back? So could you talk about that a little bit for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, that stuff that Chris is talking about, I think is crucial, is just showing up. And the first time you may be sitting in the back of the room not knowing anybody, but then the next time you recognize somebody, then and somebody says, hey, we need somebody to fold papers and put papers into mailings. Raise your hand, because nobody else wants to do that. folding papers for mailings is the worst, but somebody needs to do it. And you got to, you know, and you'll build relationships that way. Finding ways that you can help behind the scenes it's a good personal practice too. Not even just on the ways to be a part of these sort of discussions, but more often than not, I need to be reminded that it's not about me, anyways. And that's a first step. And I think that's another kind of reminder, is that we shouldn't view this as some sort of like a hobby. And you know, this is a part of who I am, part of who I'm trying to become. That it's not finding ways to integrate it into everyday things. You know, I'm sure that the majority of my friends would go, freaking Jake's posting another thing on Facebook about the problems in the world. And it's not me trying to be a broken record of brokenness. It's me trying to say, like, it's easy for me to forget about it because I'm white and I can just go watch Adventure Time on Hulu. And that's the end of it, you know? So most of the time, me putting these things out there is a reminder to myself and a way for me to be kind of constantly making sure it's front of mind for myself, because I look out my window and I usually in my neighborhood never see a person of color. And so I have to seek that out, first of all, by maybe potentially moving, but what can I do today? And so that's by being in those relationships. And Mickey, it's like you were saying too, just a quick thought is the idea of you saying, my house is burning, my house is burning. We oftentimes individualize that, where myself as the white neighbor goes, well, my house is fine, so I don't know what she's yelling about. But the more and more we develop a relationship, is it can become that our house is burning, or, you know, and if her house burns, then my house will eventually catch on fire too. That the fire that starts down the block will eventually get to mine. So for me just to not care now, you know, and how can I see that your house fire will eventually become our house fire, not meaning just mine, but ours as the community. And that only comes from relationships where I recognize your voice and I come running, and I don't necessarily need to know your justifications. I just say, I hear that something's going on. What can I do to be a part of that?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Thank you, Jake. All right, so Holly, I would love to hear from you on this, and then we're going to start wrapping things up.
Great. I want to use my time to respond to one of our viewers. Just a shout out to everyone who's been watching tonight and chatting in comments. You've been informing this discussion all along. Jennifer talked about how do we talk to white people who have been hurt or wounded in the process of unlearning racism, and so maybe have some woundedness around that. I think that's a really great question. I think it speaks to kind of the feelings that white people have as we encounter this work and examine our own culpability and our own responsibility. And I think this is part of why white people need to talk to white people about race, because there are wounds. There are wounds on all sides. There is so much brokenness and so much woundedness around race, given the history that has shaped, you know, our culture. And so to be able to be there for other white people, to hear them out, let them get to the hurting place, let them talk about what hurt them, and then help them move into a greater systemic understanding of racism, so that it's not just born in personal shame, you know, like, I'm horrible because I never knew this before now. No, let's talk about the system that you know, benefits from from white people being clueless about race. You know, let's talk about that. Let's really look systemically. And then, you know, I think just being humble ourselves about our own state, you know, and that this is not like flip a switch and, oh, you get it and you're awesome and now you can hang out with people of color. It's more about this process that needs to unfold over time, about pulling out the poison, doing the dialysis. And so the more that we can be there to witness the wounds and to be a resource for other white people who are struggling in this work, we're at different places in this work, and to meet each other along those different paths and not try to make each other right or wrong in the process, but really, you know, show up for each other, support each other in this process.
Thank you, Holly. And I do want to honor everybody who showed up for this conversation tonight. Of course, our panel here and the people that have been talking to each other um, in the chat on YouTube and asking questions. And like Holly said, your questions have been informing the discussion. And I know there is that desire for, well, exactly what do I say, or what are the first 5 steps I take, or I hear the frustration and exhaustion when I do have the white friends who say, I understand, or not understand, but I hear you. I hear that you're saying that you're in pain as a black mother, or you're fearful for your children, but what do I do? How do I fix it? And there's this desire to fix it, and several people have referenced that tonight. But it's not necessarily about there really is no 12-step plan or 20-step plan or whatever to end racism, or to have to say all the right things, to do all the right things, to become a racial justice warrior. You do have to, as again we've said over and over, you have to have the conversations, the relationships, show up for things, make mistakes, say the wrong things, learn things, unlearn other things. But one of the things is to continue to put yourself in conversation with people that will help you move along. Put yourself in spaces, and so looking for those groups like Surge, looking for somebody like Chris coming to your town, to your university, and doing a talk. And so I did ask everybody to kind of think of some resources here. So that's what we're going to end with. Is some resources and information, and I think also Scott is putting contact information up, right, of all the people. Did you put that somewhere? So that you guys can still stay in dialogue with the people on this panel, and of course you can find all of them through Transform Network as well, and we would love to connect you with those people. So if you guys could give a little what you would leave people with tonight, and with what resources or information, that would be really great. So we'll just go down the line again. Chris, if we could start with you.
Yeah, I mean, a few things is, I mean, I would just say for all white people who are trying to figure out how to get involved with racial justice work, we need white people to be vulnerable to the grief and the pain and the rage in the black community right now with Black Lives Matter, vulnerable to really hearing other white people talk about why we do this work and about saving our humanity, vulnerable to opening our hearts to this conversation, not as an intellectual exercise, but as a soul-nourishing, heart-engaged conversation. We need white people to be visionary about why we need to make this change and what this change will mean for them, and we need white people to be courageous and be engaged. So for resources, I would say mobilizing your spiritual superpowers of prayer, of song, of creating an altar. I mean, I'm sitting behind an altar in our house where Ella Baker and Ann Braden are on our altar, and I look to them as ancestors on a daily basis for strength and for guidance. Creating rituals in your life that help you feel connected and grounded to be able to be vulnerable, courageous, show up and be engaged, to join in people of color-led organizing in your community and bring white people with you. So for resources, I would say trying to figure out what are things that can help you to feel more courageous, more connected to the long tradition of this struggle, and what can help you to keep being not apathetic, because there was a question about from one viewer saying as white people can sometimes be apathetic to this struggle. What are rituals, prayer, song, community rituals that can help bring you into this work on a regular basis in a way that nourishes you and feeds you? So the inner resources and community resources of nourishing our hearts and souls to do this work to transform our world.
Awesome, thank you. And actually, Dara, I'm going to come to you last because I know you definitely have some stuff to say as far as resources. So I'm going to go backwards now and go to Jake next, and then Holly, and then Dara. So go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, I think echoing Chris, just finding those places and finding who your heroes are, like we've talked about a few times. if you don't have heroes of color, if you don't have people that are speaking out, if you don't have white heroes who are being a part of those courageous conversations, your job one should be finding some of those people. Second, just a few, I'm currently reading James Baldwin, who is a prophet, and if you're interested in anything, every time I open his book, I'm like, is he still alive and has a time machine and wrote this stuff? Because it's completely pertinent and has everything to do with today. And I posted hopefully the link will go up. If you're wanting to watch some amazing videos, John A. Powell, who's a part of the Haas Institute, just hosted an amazing conference called Othering and Belonging that was a month or so ago. And they've posted a ton of the videos from that conference. There's a great dialogue with him and Bell Hooks, a whole list of other people, and they are phenomenal. And they're all very honest and real, but also hopeful, and some of them are funny, which is always great because oftentimes we get burnt out about talking about just the crap and we're like, oh God, I'm burnt out. But some of them are humorous, and there's a comedian, and they're willing to laugh, and so I would really recommend those. It's otheringandbelonging.org, and then there's a bunch of videos, and that's a great place to start.
Great, thank you, Jake. And I will echo the bell hooks because I love bell hooks. She's okay. Holly, next.
We have an amazing collaborator and theologian on our board at Transform Network named Robin and Henderson Espinoza. And Robin talks about the logic of white supremacy. And for white people, the logic of white supremacy can be very implicit to the way we think and our worldview. And so my next step for people would be learn the logic of white supremacy. Learn it so that you can see it in yourself in white culture, and then learn it so you can see it in people of color and people of color culture as well, because it is insidious and it's long-standing and nearly perpetual unless we do something about it. So get trained, get training. Mickey and I will come to your church or your community. I'm sure Chris or Dara will come to your community and work with you. But there's really great frameworks for understanding all of this, and we don't have to invent the language. We don't have to invent the methodology. It's been developed. We're standing on the shoulders of giants here, folks. There's great work that's been done, and a lot of it's being mentioned. And Chris and Dara are amazing, activists in this arena right now. So read their stuff and get involved, like the Transform Network page. We will keep you involved. Racial justice is super important to us as a network, and we really want to join in this work with you.
Yay, thank you, Holly. Those are really important points. And Dara, if you could just kind of wrap us up with your resources, especially some of those for people that are just beginning to get involved in this conversation.
Sure. Well, I would definitely echo what all folks have been saying, that there's a real question of how do you ground yourself in community, in belonging with other people. So, like, who's your buddy? Who's the person who you can talk to about this? Whether it's someone from your church or your school or your neighborhood or someone in your family, like, who's the person that you get to bounce those ideas off of? And in light of that, we have a lot of resources on the Surge website, showingupforracialjustice.org. We've done a number of action kits, so both around specific situations, like after Michael Brown was murdered or after Trayvon Martin was murdered, but also on different issue topics, so around immigration, around voting rights, and on a whole range of different issues. We also do monthly base building calls, so calls for people who want to be organizing. So we're doing one later in this month, I think on the 23rd, on that idea of mutual interest. And how do you tap into what it is that you and other white people actually care about in terms of ending white supremacy? What is your stake in it? And you'll get to hear from folks from other places around the country, because we always feature some of the local groups. I'd also recommend that you follow us on Facebook, because we post a ton of articles, both for parents about what's going on in the news, and then just analysis and new tools as we create them. We're working on an action kit right now for Pride that's going to be coming out within the next week. So I think there are a lot of things that are out there, and that a big part of it, like Chris was saying, is don't feel like you have to get the analysis exactly right. Part of it is that we're going to make mistakes, and we need to learn from those and keep going. So you can read and you can listen, and there is so much good stuff out there. And a lot of it is, you know, as Miles Horton said, we make the road by walking. We do this work by doing this work and learning how to continue to do it better. And we're in this moment where that's happening so much. Every city has places to plug in, and we have 75 groups around the country. Transform has groups around the country. Many of the other faith-based networks do as well. So find some other people who can do the work with you, and let's be in this together.
Thank you. Yeah, that reminds me of what I said to, I was with a group of other progressive Christian leaders and talking about race, and you know, the kind of comment was, well, you know, what if I, you know, I'm trying to meet people of color in my neighborhood and get involved, and I can't find someone who I get along with or share interests with, and I was like, you know, I just need you to risk. Like, I'm risking by being alive, and by when I speak out, it's not that it's not a risk because I'm a black woman. Somehow this is easy for me to talk about. No, it's a risk every time I open my mouth. It's a risk every time I stand up. And so guess what? If you like, if this is actually what you want to see change, I need you to get in there and risk something too. So I do appreciate that you guys are calling people to vulnerability and to risk, because that is very important. So a couple of last things. I do want Jake to mention an event that he's pulling together in Portland, Oregon. So if we have anybody who's in Portland, check out this event that Jake has coming up with Reverend Sekou, who we've also mentioned tonight. Jake, could you tell people about that really quick?
Yeah, Monday, June 29th. It's being hosted at Warner Pacific College. They've graciously decided to host it with a huge list of other co-sponsors, with one being the Portland NAACP. And Reverend Sekou is going to be our keynote speaker, and then we have a panel of other panelists: Joanne Hardesty, the president of the NAACP here in Portland, Eric Knox, who's a pastor at Imago Dei Community, and Dr. Damon Glenn, who's one of the leadership over at Warner Pacific University, or Warner Pacific, and it's going to be a great event. It's called Race, Faith, and Justice in the Age of Ferguson and Baltimore, and if you're in the area, we would love to have you. It's free, and I'll give you a lemon cookie. They're going to be there.
Fantastic. And of course, you can go to transformnetwork.org. This video will be up. You can find out more about what we're doing. Transform is also, Holly and I are programming the Justice tent or the Justice track for Wild Goose Festival. Come to Wild Goose Festival. And Scott and Teresa, who also works at Transform, are programming the spirituality. So there's going to be all kinds of justice up in there. And we have lots of conversations on race going on. We also have, can you see that? Is it backwards? Highlander Center. We have the Faith-Rooted Organizing Training at the Highlander Center, September 21st through 24th, and that's what Chris talked about as a place of training for himself and inspiration for himself. We want you there. If you've never heard of the Highlander Center, Google it tonight. You will be so thankful. You'll hear. Then you'll also learn about Miss Ella Baker, who is one of my personal heroes. And it's a 4-day exploration of the essentials in organizing for justice, fueled by the deepest wells of our faith. Amazing trainers, and I cannot imagine, I can't believe that we're going to be able to get all these people in the same room. But Alexia Salvatierra, Lisa Sharon Harper, Reverend Martin Garcia, Matthew Sorens, Father Juan Carlos Ruiz, Rich Kong Yu Sean Show, David Solnit, me, Holly, and Teresa, all assisting them. So you guys have got to come. There's information on the website about that as well. And keep up with us on social media as well. And all of these lovely people, you will find all their information on our website and on the Facebook page. So, and tell all your friends about it. If this conversation was helpful to you, which I know it was because all of the brilliance here on the panel, make sure that you share the link to the video with your friends, with your pastor, with your book club, whatever, share it, make sure people know about it, post it on Facebook, post it to Twitter. We need to get this conversation out there, and we need to have more of these conversations. This is just the beginning. We will do this again. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you so much for your time, for your energy, for your wisdom. It has been an honor to listen to all of your voices tonight and to be here with you. And I am just looking forward to more building and more justice with all of you. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for everybody on YouTube. Good night.